Let them get eaten by the Vorkath raid party? Those kids were terrified. The Drachnid ambassador's multifaceted eyes narrowed to pinpoints. Human Thompson, you understand that by galactic law, interfering with a sanctioned hunt right challenge is grounds for immediate diplomatic censure? Yeah, well. Marcus winced as the medical nanites began knitting his flesh back together. Your laws need better edge cases for preventing the murder of children. Ambassador Reltic's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the insectoid equivalent of an exasperated sigh. Please, explain to me in detail how you managed to single-handedly derail centuries of carefully maintained diplomatic protocol between two of the most militant species in the Orion Arm. Marcus settled back in the medbay chair, a wry grin spreading across his face. Now that's an interesting story. Hours earlier. The Galactic Concordat Station. Harmonious exchange, lived up to its name about as well as any artificial structure housing representatives from 17 species could, which was to say, barely. Marcus had spent the last 6 months learning to navigate its Byzantine corridors and even more convoluted social protocols. He'd gotten pretty good at it too, right up until he literally stumbled across 3 Drachnid cubs huddled in a maintenance shaft during his morning run. Hey there, little ones, he said softly, crouching down to their eye level. The cubs chittered nervously, their iridescent scales shifting through warning patterns of red and orange. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. The smallest cub, barely the size of a human toddler, gave a series of rapid clicks that Marcus's universal translator rendered as, "Hide us! The bad ones are coming!" Marcus's diplomatic training kicked in immediately. Bad ones? Who's after you? Vorkath hunters, the largest cub managed between terrified chirps. They declared hunt right on our clutch bearer. We ran when the fighting started. Shit, Marcus muttered under his breath. The Vorkath were notorious throughout the sector. Massive reptiloids who lived by an ancient warrior code that demanded regular ritual combat to maintain their social hierarchies. They considered the Drachnid their hereditary rivals, and their hunt right challenges were technically legal under Concordat law. But targeting cubs? That wasn't just wrong, it was stupid. The Drachnid would never forgive such an offense. This could spark an interstellar war. The sound of heavy footsteps and guttural voices echoing down the corridor made his decision for him. Quick, in here! Marcus ushered the cubs into a nearby storage compartment, then positioned himself in front of it just as 3 Vorkath warriors rounded the corner. They were impressive specimens, each nearly 9 feet tall, with thick scales in mottled greens and grays. The leader's ceremonial hunt armor was decorated with dozens of trophy marks. Stand aside, soft flesh, the warrior rumbled in heavily accented standard. We track prey. Marcus affected his best confused diplomat expression. Oh, you must be here for the trade delegation. I'm afraid you're in a restricted access area, but I'd be happy to escort you back to the public levels. The Vorkath leader's eyes narrowed. We smell Drachnid young. Move or be moved. Yeah, about that. Marcus straightened to his full height, still a good 3 feet shorter than the warriors. Those cubs are under human diplomatic protection now. So unless you want to start an incident that'll have the entire Earth Defense Force breathing down your necks, I suggest you reconsider your hunt parameters. The warriors exchanged looks that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. The leader took a menacing step forward. Human diplomatic protection means nothing during sanctioned hunt right. Final warning. Marcus sighed. You know what the really funny thing is? 6 months ago I probably would have believed that. The first punch caught the leader completely by surprise. What followed was, diplomatically speaking, an absolute disaster. Marcus had studied enough Vorkath combat forms to know he couldn't beat them in a fair fight. So he didn't fight fair. He used the narrow corridor to his advantage, keeping the warriors from bringing their superior numbers to bear. He fought dirty, targeting joints, using maintenance panels as improvised weapons, and generally being what the Vorkath would consider an honorless coward. But he kept them away from the cubs. By the time station security finally arrived, Marcus was bleeding from 6 wounds, had probably broken several bones, and had managed to thoroughly humiliate 3 of the most dangerous warriors in the sector. The Vorkath were arrested for violating station weapons protocols. Marcus had made very sure to loudly announce each violation during the fight. The cubs were reunited with their clutch bearer, who had survived the initial challenge. And Marcus. And that's how I ended up here, he concluded, gesturing at the medbay around them. Ambassador Reltic's antenna had stopped twitching, which Marcus chose to interpret as a good sign. You realize, she said slowly, that by invoking human diplomatic protection, even falsely, you've created an unprecedented legal situation. The Vorkath will demand satisfaction. The Drachnid are already calling for a formal alliance with Earth. The Concordat Security Council is in emergency session trying to determine if they need to rewrite the entire hunt rights statute. Sounds like a lot of paperwork, Marcus agreed cheerfully. Good thing that's what diplomats are for, right? The ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly, her species equivalent of laughter. Human Thompson, in my 5 decades of diplomatic service, I have never encountered anyone quite like you. I'll take that as a compliment. You would. She pulled out a datapad. Now we need to discuss how to handle the 16 formal diplomatic protests I've received in the last hour. Marcus settled in for a long debrief. Being the first human to become a folk hero to both the Drachnid and Vorkath youth movements, for very different reasons, was probably going to complicate his job somewhat. Worth it, though. The memory of those cubs' gratitude when he got them back to their clutch-bearer would warm his heart for years to come. Even if he did have to spend the next month explaining to increasingly bewildered alien diplomats that no, humans didn't actually have any mystical combat abilities. They were just really, really good at fighting dirty when kids were in danger. The resulting doctrine of human protective instinct that made its way into the next revision of Concordat law would eventually become one of the cornerstones of human-alien relations. Though Marcus did have to repeatedly explain that the clause about berserker rage in defense of young was perhaps a bit overdramatic. 3 months later. And then the human diplomat defeated 3 Vorkath warriors using nothing but cleaning supplies and clever insults. The young Drachnid's scales rippled with excitement as she regaled her clutchmates with the now familiar tale. In the corner of the station's recreation area, Marcus sipped his coffee and tried not to grin too obviously. The story had grown somewhat in the telling. He was pretty sure he hadn't actually used the maintenance chief's favorite mop as an improvised staff weapon, though that wasn't a bad idea for next time. A deep voice rumbled behind him. The young ones still tell tales of your unconventional victory. Marcus turned to find one of the Vorkath warriors he'd fought. Katak, he remembered after a moment. Kids love a good story, he agreed carefully. The warrior's posture wasn't aggressive, but Marcus kept track of the exits anyway. Old habits. To his surprise, Katak's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. Indeed. My own offspring have begun training in what they call human style, much to their combat instructor's despair. It seems your creative approach to warfare has made quite an impression. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. Oh God, I'm so sorry. That must be driving the traditionalists crazy. You have no idea. Katak settled his massive frame into a nearby chair that creaked ominously. Though I must admit, after reviewing the security footage, your tactics were most effective, if unconventional. Perhaps there is something to be said for adapting our methods. Careful there, Marcus warned with a grin. Talk like that could get you labeled a dangerous reformer. Too late. Katak's expression turned serious. The cubs you protected that day, they visit the warrior creche now, teaching our young ones games from their culture, sharing stories. This has never happened before. Marcus felt something warm bloom in his chest. Really? That's amazing. Indeed. Katak rose to his full height. You have caused great chaos in our traditions, human Thompson. But perhaps some traditions need to be challenged. He inclined his head slightly. Good day. Marcus watched the warrior leave, then turned back to where the young Drachnid was now demonstrating what she claimed were secret human combat moves to her enthralled audience. Her form was terrible, but her enthusiasm was undeniable. Just like the Vorkath kids trying to figure out how to incorporate improvised weapons into their martial arts. Sometimes the best diplomatic victories came from the most unexpected places. Marcus finished his coffee, made a mental note to look into starting a cross-species youth cultural exchange program, and headed off to his next meeting. He had a feeling the ambassador was going to either love or hate this idea. Either way, it would definitely be interesting. 6 months after the incident. And you're absolutely certain about this proposal? Ambassador Reltic's antenna twitched in what Marcus had learned to recognize as barely contained amusement. Marcus adjusted his formal diplomatic attire, still uncomfortable after all this time, and nodded. The youth exchange program is already happening informally. We might as well make it official and ensure proper supervision. The data pad between them displayed the preliminary outline of what Marcus had dubbed the Concordat Youth Cultural Integration Initiative. The name was appropriately bureaucratic enough to slip past most objections. while the actual contents were revolutionary enough to make several species' conservative factions have collective fits.
You realize, Reltic noted dryly, that suggesting Vorkath and Drachnid younglings participate in joint recreational activities would have been considered grounds for sectoral excommunication just a year ago? Times change. Marcus shrugged.
Besides, they're already doing it. Might as well give them a framework that doesn't involve learning questionable combat techniques in maintenance corridors. The ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. You mean like the incident last week when 3 Vorkath initiates and a clutch of Drachnid adolescents were caught attempting to recreate your legendary maintenance shaft battle using cleaning supplies?
In my defense, Marcus raised his hands. I specifically told them that part was exaggerated.
Indeed. Reltic's compound eyes sparkled with what Marcus chose to interpret as approval. Well, the proposal has merit despite, or perhaps because of, its unorthodox nature. I'll present it to the council next session. The council chamber was as imposing as ever, with representatives from all 17 concordate species arranged in their traditional positions. Marcus stood at the presentation podium, trying not to fidget under the collective gaze of some of the most powerful beings in this arm of the galaxy. And so, he concluded his presentation, the initiative would provide structured opportunities for cultural exchange, while maintaining appropriate safety protocols and respecting each species' traditions. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of various species' versions of murmured discussion. Marcus caught fragments of conversation in multiple languages, his translator working overtime to keep up. Unprecedented. The humans truly are mad, but the younglings are already could reduce interspecies tensions. The Vorkath representative, a massive female warrior named Kalar, rose to her full height. The chamber fell silent. Human Thompson, her voice rumbled through the space. You propose to take our sacred warrior training and turn it into games for children? Marcus met her gaze steadily. With respect, honored Kalar, I propose to take the games children are already playing and give them structure that honors your traditions while fostering understanding between species. Explain. Marcus tapped his datapad, bringing up footage from the station's security feeds. It showed groups of young Vorkath and Drachnid engaged in what they called mixed combat practice. A fascinating blend of both species' traditional forms, with some distinctly human influences. They're already learning from each other, Marcus pointed out. The Vorkath younglings are incorporating Drachnid agility techniques. The Drachnid are studying Vorkath strength-based methods. Both are adding human adaptive thinking, and most importantly, he paused for effect. They're having fun. Kalar's eyes narrowed. Fun is not the purpose of combat training. Isn't it, though? Marcus couldn't help but press the point. Your own histories speak of warrior children learning through play combat. The Drachnid have similar traditions. We're not replacing your training methods. We're supplementing them with cross-species understanding that could prevent future conflicts. The chamber erupted again, but Marcus noticed Kalar's thoughtful expression. More importantly, he saw several of the younger council members nodding along. 2 weeks later. I still can't believe they approved it, Marcus muttered, watching the first official mixed-species youth training session from the observation deck. Ambassador Reltic stood beside him, her antenna waving gently. Your argument was compelling, and as you pointed out, they were already doing it unofficially. Sometimes the best diplomatic victories come from recognizing and formalizing existing trends. Below them, a young Vorkath was demonstrating a traditional warrior stance to an attentive group of Drachnid cubs. Nearby, a Drachnid adolescent was teaching Vorkath initiates about scale-color communication patterns. It's not just them either, Marcus noted. Look! He gestured to where representatives from 3 other species youth groups were cautiously approaching the training area. The Vorkath and Drachnid younglings immediately waved them over, eager to share their new games. The Concordat Youth Cultural Integration Initiative, Reltic mused. Quite a mouthful. Yeah, the kids just call it Play Fighting Club, Marcus grinned. I tried to explain the reference, but it got lost in translation. Speaking of translation, Reltic's antenna twitched in what Marcus recognized as her breaking news gesture. The council has another request for you. Oh? Given your unique approach to interspecies relations, they want you to develop a standardized training program for human diplomatic staff. Apparently, several member species have specifically requested human representatives who can think as creatively as you do. Marcus groaned. They want me to teach other diplomats how to cause productive chaos? Essentially. Reltic's mandibles clicked in amusement, though I suspect the official curriculum description will be somewhat more diplomatic. Below them, A young Vorkath had just successfully mimicked a Drachnid warning color pattern using finger paint, to the delighted chittering of his new friends. The sight made Marcus smile despite himself.
You know what? Why not? But I have one condition.
Yes?
Marcus gestured at the joyful chaos below.
All diplomatic trainees have to spend at least one session getting absolutely destroyed at mixed species tag by these kids. Nothing teaches creative problem-solving like trying to catch a Drachnid cub who's learned Vorkath evasion techniques. Reltic's answering click pattern translated roughly as helpless laughter. I'll add it to the proposal, though I suspect the Council will want to call it something more official than getting destroyed at tag. Practical application of interspecies mobility dynamics in a recreational context? Perfect. You're learning diplomatic speak quite well. Marcus watched as the impromptu play session below evolved into some kind of complex game involving elements from at least 4 different species' traditional training methods. The pride in his chest was entirely unprofessional, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Sometimes the best way to change the galaxy was to let the kids lead the way, even if it meant occasionally having to explain to stern warrior culture representatives why their offspring were coming home covered in paint and babbling excitedly about human-style games. 1 year after the incident, the annual Concordat Cultural Exchange Festival had always been a rather staid affair. Carefully choreographed performances, formal presentations, and diplomatic niceties. This year was different.
Are they? A visiting Earth diplomat struggled to find words as they watched the main performance arena.
Yep. Marcus couldn't keep the pride out of his voice. The first ever mixed species youth demonstration team. They've been practicing for months. The arena floor was filled with young members of various species moving in surprising harmony. Vorkath strength techniques flowed into Drachnid agility patterns. Traditional warrior stances blended with playful acrobatics. And through it all, distinctly human-inspired improvisation kept the performance unpredictable and engaging. It's beautiful, the Earth diplomat murmured. But how did you ever convince the traditionalists to allow this? Marcus grinned. I didn't. The kids did it themselves. We just provided the space and made sure nobody got hurt while they figured it out. The performance reached its climax. A complex synchronized movement involving all participants that symbolized unity through diversity. The audience erupted in their species' various expressions of approval. You know, the diplomat said thoughtfully, when they sent me to evaluate your unconventional diplomatic methods, I expected something more. Chaotic? Diplomatic. Marcus laughed. Sometimes the best diplomacy happens when you get out of the way and let people, especially young people, figure things out for themselves. We just have to give them the chance and the space to do it safely. The diplomat nodded slowly. I'll be sure to include that in my report, though perhaps with slightly more formal phrasing. Facilitation of organic interspecies cultural development through structured but flexible frameworks? You're getting quite good at this. Below them, the performance had ended, but the various young participants weren't leaving the arena. Instead, they were teaching each other new moves, sharing stories, and generally acting like kids anywhere in the galaxy. Marcus spotted his original 3 Drachnid cubs, now almost adolescents, enthusiastically explaining something to a group of younglings from 5 different species. Their scales rippled with joy and excitement. Sometimes the best diplomatic victories didn't look like diplomacy at all. And if the next generation of Concordat species grew up seeing each other as friends rather than rivals, well, that was just a happy side effect of letting kids be kids. Even if it meant occasionally having to explain to various species leaders why traditional combat training now involved something called dance battles. But that was a diplomatic crisis for another day. 18 months after the incident. Absolutely not. Marcus crossed his arms, staring down at the holographic proposal floating above his desk. We are not calling it the Thompson Protocol for Interspecies Youth Combat Integration. Ambassador Reltic's antenna twitched with barely contained amusement. The Council feels that attaching your name to the official documentation would lend it greater legitimacy. The Council, Marcus countered, is trying to make sure they have someone specific to blame when this inevitably causes another diplomatic incident. Speaking of diplomatic incidents, Reltic's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was her equivalent of clearing her throat. Have you seen this morning's security reports? Marcus groaned. What did they do now? The ambassador manipulated her datapad, bringing up footage from one of the station's recreational areas. A group of young Vorkath warriors were attempting to teach a mixed-species group what appeared to be their traditional war dances. The results were interesting. Is that a meridian floating upside down? Indeed. Reltic zoomed in on the anti-gravity-enabled youngster. Apparently, they've discovered that combining Vorkath ceremonial movements with various species' unique physical capabilities produces some rather spectacular effects. Please tell me they're not calling it zero-G battle dancing. They are, in fact, calling it exactly that. Marcus dropped his head into his hands. The traditionalists are going to have collective aneurysms. Actually, Reltic's antenna wiggled in what Marcus recognized as her "you're not going to believe this" gesture. The Vorkath High Command has expressed interest in incorporating some of these innovations into their ceremonial displays. Marcus's head snapped up. You're kidding. Not at all. It seems they've realized that adapting their traditions to include other species' capabilities makes them more impressive, not less. She paused meaningfully. They're calling it evolutionary combat aesthetics. That's actually kind of brilliant. Indeed. Though you might want to prepare yourself for tomorrow's council session. The Meridian representatives are planning to propose an official multi-species ceremonial performance division. Of course they are. Marcus couldn't help but smile. Let me guess. They want to call it the Concordat Youth Artistic Combat League? Close. The current proposed name is Integrated Ceremonial Combat Performance Initiative. That's way too many capital letters. Welcome to bureaucracy, human Thompson. 2 years after the incident, the training arena was chaos in its purest form, and Marcus couldn't be prouder. What had started as informal play-fighting sessions had evolved into something entirely new. A fusion of various species combat traditions, artistic expressions, and cultural elements that defied easy categorization. Currently, a team of Vorkath initiates was attempting to synchronize their traditional war stomp with a Drachnid scale flash pattern, while a group of Meridian youngsters provided anti-gravity support for some particularly ambitious maneuvers. Off to the side, representatives from 3 other species were workshopping what they called multimodal combat percussion, which seemed to involve turning various traditional fighting stances into a surprisingly complex rhythm section. You realize, a familiar rumbling voice came from behind him, that when I suggested incorporating other species' techniques into our training, this is not quite what I had in mind. Marcus turned to find Katak watching the proceedings with what could only be described as bemused resignation. Too late to back out now, Marcus grinned. I heard your daughter's team is favored to win the inaugural Interspecies Combat Arts Festival next month. The massive warrior's scales shifted in what Marcus had learned was embarrassed pride. She has adapted well to these new methods, though I am still not entirely convinced about the use of musical accompaniment in warrior training. Think of it as tactical rhythm coordination. You are becoming dangerous proficient at diplomatic reframing, human Thompson. I learned from the best. Marcus gestured at the organized chaos before them. Speaking of learning, how are the adult training programs coming along? Katak's expression shifted to something more serious. Better than expected. Many warriors were skeptical at first, but after seeing how these methods improve reaction time and adaptive thinking, he paused. We are considering making some elements mandatory for all combat instructors. Marcus whistled low. That's a big step. The galaxy changes. We must change with it. Katak's massive shoulders lifted in what might have been a shrug. Or as my daughter would say, we must get with the program. She's been spending too much time with the human cultural exchange students. Indeed. She asked me yesterday if we could install what she called a sound system in the warrior creche. And it will be delivered next week. Katak's expression was unreadable. Apparently, proper acoustic support is essential for maximum combat rhythm optimization. Marcus bit back a laugh. That's a very technical justification. She submitted a 15-page proposal with references to 6 different species combat training methodologies. Now Katak did sound proud, including several studies on the psychological benefits of synchronized movement in group combat scenarios. She's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the diplomatic corps, assuming she doesn't convince the entire warrior caste to become what she calls battle choreographers first. 2 years and 3 months after the incident, the inaugural Interspecies Combat Arts Festival was, by any measure, a stunning success. Even the most traditional representatives had to admit that the display of coordinated multi-species combat techniques was impressive. The winning team, a mixed group of Vorkath, Drachnid, and Meridian youth led by Katak's daughter, had performed a piece they called Harmonic Warrior Convergence that combined traditional combat forms with anti-gravity assisted acrobatics and synchronized scale flash patterns. The resulting light show had been visible from 3 decks of the station.
More importantly, the after-party, officially designated as the Post-Performance Cultural Integration Reception, had turned into exactly the kind of joyful chaos that Marcus had come to expect from these events.
"I have a confession to make," Ambassador Reltic said, watching young representatives from a dozen species teaching each other their various victory celebrations.
Oh?
"When you first proposed making the youth exchange program official, I thought you were completely mad." Marcus laughed. "To be fair, I probably was. Perhaps." Her antenna waved in amusement. "But sometimes madness is exactly what diplomacy needs." She gestured at the celebration before them. "Look at them. 2 years ago, half these species wouldn't even sit in the same room together. Kids have a way of cutting through diplomatic nonsense." "Indeed." Reltic's compound eyes sparkled. "Though I'm not entirely sure how to explain to the Council that the next generation of diplomatic protocols might include something called battle dancing. Just call it Integrated Kinetic Cultural Expression, and they'll approve it without reading the details. You're learning, human Thompson." "I had good teachers." Marcus watched as a young Vorkath attempted to teach a Drachnid the complex hand-slap greeting that human teenagers had apparently introduced to the station. "Though I have to admit, I never expected any of this when I jumped into that maintenance shaft 2 years ago." "The best diplomatic initiatives often start with someone doing something supposedly impossible." Reltic's antenna twitched thoughtfully. "Speaking of which, the Council has another proposal for you." "I'm not going to like this, am I?" "They want to establish a permanent human-led diplomatic training program, focusing on what they're calling unconventional cultural integration methodologies." "They want me to teach other diplomats how to cause productive chaos through interpretive combat dance?" "Essentially, yes." Reltic's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Though I suspect the official curriculum description will be somewhat more diplomatic?" "Precisely." Marcus watched as the impromptu victory party evolved into what appeared to be a multi-species dance-off, incorporating elements from at least 8 different traditional combat forms. Somewhere in the crowd, he could hear Katok's daughter teaching everyone a chant that mixed Vorkath war cries with what sounded suspiciously like Earth pop music. "You know what?" he grinned. "Why not?" "But I have conditions." "Of course you do. First, we're not calling it the Thompson Protocol." "Noted. Second, all diplomatic trainees have to participate in at least 1 full performance cycle with the youth groups. That might actually be good for them. And third," Marcus gestured at the joyful chaos before them, "we make sure this never becomes too formal. The moment we try to overregulate it is the moment it loses what makes it special." Reltic's antenna waved in agreement. "I believe the human phrase is 'let kids be kids'?" "Exactly. Even if those kids are 9-foot-tall warrior initiates learning to breakdance." The sound of laughter, in all its various species forms, filled the station's halls. Somewhere in the crowd, the original 3 Drachnid cubs were teaching a group of younger children the story of how it all began, complete with dramatically exaggerated reenactments of Marcus's maintenance shaft battle. The story had grown considerably in the telling. Marcus was pretty sure he hadn't actually used interpretive dance to defeat the Vorkath warriors.